Jai Prabhuji, hello everybody. We are having, I believe, our sixth class in the topic of relationships in this article about relationships, and today is our last class and the conclusion of this journey that we walked with Prabhuji. As oftentimes, I think it will be more correct even to say in every case, the message of Prabhuji, the content of the retroprogressive yoga will always culminate in the meditation, in the observation. And this is the heart and the origin of all the content of the retroprogressive yoga. We said previously in previous classes that the retroprogressive yoga does not have clear recommendations of what to do, of what not to do, of what path is right, of what path is wrong. Is it better to be a secular person? Is it better to be a religious person? And so many other questions that one can have in his life. What type of profession to choose, what type of path again to choose, where to live, etc., etc., etc. The retroprogressive yoga, as I understand it, and Prabhuji says it in his words, speaks about an individual journey. And each and every person is going to have his unique journey and his unique association with the contents of this message that is coming from Prabhuji, from Prabhuji's individual journey and realization. And what I do think that it has, we previously mentioned the fact that this yoga does have a sādhanā, and we said the sādhanā, or the ultimate view of reality according to this yoga is that only consciousness is. What also I believe that we can identify, which is a question that I asked myself, okay, so what does Prabhuji say? What is the recommendation? What do I do with all these books and message that is so open and inclusive and tolerate and rich in path, in practices, in types of knowledge? What do I do with it in my life? Prabhuji does not accept disciples. He's not into attracting audience to listen to him, to follow him. He's telling us, Prabhuji, that he only shares. And we see it evidently that he doesn't do deliberate efforts to push this message. But this is more something that is happening because of the effort of us, of the disciples, that feel that we really need to make something of these diamonds. We feel we have to put it something in books, in lectures. And this is basically the reason that this message is available to some extent. But what I do think, I'm trying to think, okay, if I'm reading Prabhuji's books and listening to his lectures, what do I take to my life? I get no guidance. I get no recommendation of something to stop, of something to start, of some change to do. How do I apply it in my life? So my opinion is that the recommendation that this message inevitably leads us to is observation, meditation. I think that if we would need to choose one recommendation that Prabhuji would give any individual, is meditation. And I think that meditation doesn't even have to be in this image, in this position, but more essentially to create detachment from the noise of the world, to create separation from what is happening to us in our lives, in our concrete words and interactions, including our relationships with others, which is the specific article that we are dealing with, and some quiet space where we can observe. And I think that this is the recommendation: meditation, observation, detachment. And this is why we see it always as the conclusion, as the culmination, as also will be the case in this particular article. So today's class we are finding more and more indication and even practical guidance into this meditation. We learned about the relationships with Prabhuji in the previous classes in this section, that we cannot start to deal with the topic of relationships with other human beings before we understand, in a way, our relationship with ourselves and the topic of the self-image. Before we understand that actually we are fractured, we have some dissonance in our own relationship with ourselves because we are assuming our reality to something that is not real. Interpreting ourselves not as who we really are. And this is why there is separation. There is our existence, which is separated in it. And it's the case of each and every individual. We all have consciousness. We are all conscious. And there is the persona that we identify with. And until Prabhuji tells us, until we don't understand this point, there will be no ground for us to do real changes. We are acting out of the persona, and this creates in us conflicts, lack of harmony. So Prabhuji guides us in this article. The only way to treat this topic of relationships is to observe this point and to find a place in us when we are acting not from the self-image. So if we continue to act from the self-image, from the ego, and relate to others as self-images or egos, there will be no conversation, as we said, no relationships, because this is all artificial. We're not acting from the reality. We're not interacting in reality. So the only way to do significant, true changes in ourselves and in our relationships consequently will be to bring light to this complex situation that we are situated in. And Prabhuji told us that the way to do this transition in a way is to be situated in the moment, right? This was the topic of our previous class when we read the part that Prabhuji delved in the topic of the here and now. We understood together with Prabhuji what is really here, what is really now, and the importance of acting from this state that Prabhuji calls a dimensionless state in order to have real interactions, in order to be in communication with ourselves and with others. And today, which is again the conclusion of the article and the conclusion of this topic, we are really receiving a practical guidance from meditation. So we are continuing with this topic and will culminate in meditation. So let's read. Since we live deeply rooted in the past, the image that we have made up is stale. Although we move in the present, we do so based on the past, on what was. The reality is the present, but if we live as images, we are memory. We only see the past and future and think that now is an imaginary point between yesterday and tomorrow. The past seems real to us because it resides in our memory, and the future in our hopes. Nonetheless, it is impossible to trap the reality of the present. Unlike the past that we store in our memory and the future that we hold in our imagination, the present slips between our fingers and can be neither possessed nor held. When we wish to perceive the now, it is still future, and when we think we have trapped it, it is already past. When we aspire to experience the now, it belongs to the future, and when we notice that we have experienced it, it is already in the past. The image is thought, and therefore it is time. Our reality, on the other hand, is attention and awareness. The image does not know the now, because the present is consciousness. So here we can say we get a recap of the previous class when we understood about the now that it's not on the line of the time. It is not a third time that is between past and future. Prabhuji told us the present, the now, is a dimensionless state. It is imperceivable. We will not find it in the line of the time. And what is mostly significant to our content is that all the complications that we discuss about the self-image that we hold on to will not exist in the present. All our problems, all our suffering, all our complications are originating in the self-image, are a result of the self-image, and they will live as long as the self-image lives. In our identification with it, of course, which holds this image. We think that this is us. This is the image that we have about the self, about ourselves. It's an image, but we think that this is us. As long as we think it, we will have all these complications that are coming from the past and are projecting toward the future. Prabhuji tells us the present is like acid. It's like a magic. Once we are situated in the now, not in the line of the time, but in this state that is devoid of time, there is no self-image. We act from a genuine place, we can say, and not because of our ideas and problems and difficulties and mechanisms and reactions that are originating in the past, as we will learn more with Prabhuji also today. So Prabhuji invites us again to situate ourselves in the now, because in the now, the self-image does not exist. What Prabhuji tells us about the self-image is that it is stale. So we are some person that we think that is us, and all our energy, all our lives is invested in this persona. We don't want to succeed in life. We want that this self-image will succeed because we think it is us. What is this self-image? How do we look? What others think about us? We think that this entity will succeed, but it is not us. So it can succeed and we continue to suffer, right? We know about cases that people were so successful and committed suicide. The self-image succeeded, but they remain miserable. They remain fractured. There was still lack of harmony. And of course, we know about great saints, they could be not so successful as self-images. If we think about Buddha, he left everything. He was a failure. If we look at it carefully, take ourselves to the situation and really examine, not thinking about the great Buddha, but what happened. He was supposed to be a king. He had everything. He left the palace. He left his duties. He left his wife. He left a newborn child. Now we would say this is unspoken of. Into the unknown. But he realized his essence. And he became the Buddha. For us now, maybe the Buddha is successful because we hear about him and he's popular. But at the time, he was not successful as a self-image, but he was blissful. He realized everything that Prabhuji speaks about here, about the self-image and about who he really is. And this is the true success. So in other words, what we want to say, our success is not the success of the self-image. And what Prabhuji says here, the self-image is stale. It's lifeless. It lacks energy because it's made of past. So we can make a very sophisticated self-image, maybe popular, maybe famous, maybe successful, maybe intelligent, whatever we feel gives us more peace. With ourselves, if we have this self-image, more happiness, more satisfaction. Still, it is not directly linked to our true happiness, to our authentic fulfillment. As human beings, this is what we all seek. Finally, as human beings, of course, we all want to be free. We all want to be happy. This is why we do all these things and continue to nourish the self-image, because we think this is the solution. Prabhuji tells us this is not the solution. It will keep us more fractured. If you want to really succeed, really release ourselves of the suffering, of the conflict, we need to know who we are. Otherwise, we don't know what we want if we don't know who we are. And for this, we need this detachment that Prabhuji speaks about in this article. So I think Prabhuji speaks about relationship, right? The original question was here about how to improve my relationships with others. And we get indication not only about our relationships with others, but as we said, about our relationship with ourselves, about our relationship maybe with the transcendence, maybe with God, maybe with life, right? We all have different relationships with life. Even if we don't believe in God, we feel life is with us, life is against us, we have some relationship. And all this is addressed if we are taking Prabhuji's guidance into recognizing the trap in which we are situated as egos. And what further I think is that when Prabhuji leads us in a way to more harmonious relationships, because as we said, once we will have more harmony, more order, more clarity in our internal world, the consequence will be that we will also be more kind and more tolerant to others naturally. Of course, our conflicts that are between each other are a result of our internal conflict. I think that this is obvious to each and every person. So not only this will happen, but also I think that Prabhuji does not pay too much attention in this article to the success in the relationships. In a way, he shifts the topic. This is not, don't focus on the outside. This is my own understanding. And I think that even maybe some of us think that we have great relationships with others. That we are not violent, that we are considerate, that we are kind. But as long as these relationships are based on the self-image of ourselves and of others, still, also us are not really in authentic relationships. And also for these cases, the recommendation will be to observe more and to understand more themselves and others, their situation, and naturally it will also be to understand the situation of others once we have more clarity in general in life. So in other words, what I want to say is that I don't think that the goal is to have great relationships. I don't think that Prabhuji's goal is ever to improve ourselves psychologically, right? Prabhuji even mentioned it in the article. We're not speaking here about psychological changes. We're not speaking about trying to be more acceptable to others, more convenient to others, more adaptable in society. This is not where Prabhuji leads us. But he speaks about a transformation, about a transformation at the core of our, we can say, thinking, perceiving life, interpreting life. About some revolution that is very difficult to do because we are so attached to this self-image. And usually, as we said previously also, this process is a long process. The retroprogressive yoga, it's not something that will happen to us in one day. At least from the cases that I am familiar with. Prabhuji speaks about cases that maybe virtues of the soul, they can get it very fast and go through this transformation. But for most of us human beings, we are expected to have a very long process that requires a lot of patience, a lot of compassion, a lot of love, and love of the process in my own understanding and observation, and of course for my own process as I see it. And I think that the retroprogressive yoga welcomes us for patience with ourselves, to let the processes happen and observe them, and our direction is always try to bring more and more attention, awareness Again, as we said, this is the core, this is the essence of this message as I see it. Observation. No matter what our situation is, how complicated or not so complicated, what will help us is more quiet, is more detachment, is more observation that will bring us naturally more wisdom. The more we are reactive, we will be less intelligent. And this is related, of course, also directly to the topic of our relationships with others. For an ordinary person, the present is illusory, and only the past and future are real. But for an enlightened being, the now is all there is. Along with the realization of our true nature, the past and the future lose their reality, and the present becomes real. So I think that in Prabhuji's contents, we get on one hand a feeling of a very close friend that is so similar to us, and we're so similar to him. And I think that this is true. We're all human beings. Yet at the same time, Prabhuji does make a clear distinction that, in my humble opinion, is major for us to understand in our spiritual journey between ordinary beings and realized beings. We don't make this distinction in order to flatter someone, or to admire someone, or to feel less, or to have some convenience, all of which can happen for us egos. But for a genuine seeker, I think that this distinction is major because first we understand that there is a state in which we can really be free. For us currently, it's imagination. We can feel some relief and we think, okay, this is life. We can feel sometimes moments of relief from the suffering, or blissful moments, or even beautiful moments in meditation or otherwise, inspiration, etc. And we tend to think, okay, this is life. There are highs and lows, ups and downs, etc. But these realized beings speak with us about a state that we can transform completely. That for us, again, it's an imagination. Understandably, because we will never experience such a state. That we are always in this now that Prabhuji speaks about here. But this distinction, I think it's very kind and important, first because it is the reality, and second because it clarifies to us our potential. And it clarifies to us the power that necessarily will come from beings that are established in this now, that we can recognize. If we are open to this and seeking it, desiring it, we can sense it. In Prabhuji and other many examples, the power of the truth. As genuine seekers, this is what we seek, like a magnet. This is what we want. Someone that can show us the way, because if this is what we want, anyone who walks this path and who realizes himself, it's a treasure for us. So here Prabhuji tells us, he makes this distinction between realized beings and ordinary beings, like us. Prabhuji says this, what we spoke in the previous class and also in the previous paragraph about this living in the line of the time, which is where we all live as self-images, as egos, as ordinary beings. We are living in the line of the time. Our goals, our aspirations, our failures and disappointments are related to things that happen in the line of the time, not to this moment. We are a self-image. This is what we relate our existence to, and this is the most important thing for us, this self-image. Even, again, we can touch moments in meditation, but we go back to the self-image. Ultimately, this is who we are. What we are, what people thought about us. How we think that we are perceived by others. This is where we live. This is what we want to fix and improve. And Prabhuji tells us, in the case of realized beings, not this line of time is all that matters, but they are living constantly in the now. And this dimensionless state that we heard about in the previous class, that is transcendental to the time and it's transcendental to the place. It's a state of being, of living now. Of course, realized beings will do things in the line of the time. There are human beings on this planet. Right? Shankaracharya wrote many books. He walked all over India. He had a lot of debate. He wanted to prove his point of view, his siddhanta. But the center of their lives is the experience in the now. So all that they do is a consequence from this establishment in the now. And not as in our case, that we are situated in the line of time and we want also to experience the now. Our center is the line of time, is the self-image, and we are aspiring as self-image to touch the now. For these beings, they are established in the now, in the present, in the reality. And from the now, everything that happens to them will originate. And they are situated in this observation. We can witness in Prabhuji's word, this is always where he speaks from the observation and toward the observation. In order to observe, we must be in the now, as we heard from Prabhuji. This is the only clean place from which we can observe. If we are not in the moment, in the dimensionless state, we are entangled. We don't have a clear vision because we are the self-image. We are in the identification. The only ability that we can have to observe, witness, not as self-images, is if we are outside of it, of course. If we are analyzing, we are still the self-image. Intellectually thinking about it, doing some psychological work, we are the self-image. We are in the same trap. The only way to observe is to be outside of this image. And Prabhuji tells us, realized beings are those who are situated in the now. Ordinary beings are those who are situated in this line of the time. And this is a major fundamental difference. We live in and through the image we have created of ourselves. That image is memory, a bundle of recollections. It is a corpse made of what we wanted to do and never did. It contains our frustrations, past ambitions, and unfulfilled dreams. The image is dead, and therefore it does not allow us to touch life. It distances us from reality and isolates us from existence. Since the image is composed of the past, it clings to, retains, and imprisons the known. Protecting the past, the image actually protects itself. The future is nothing but a projection of times gone by, a yesterday with some small modifications. Life is unpredictable, but our image escapes to the past and wants to repeat it. So here Prabhuji tells us, one significant point is that the future, in fact, is also past. You cannot think about anything in the future that is not made of elements that are existing in the past. We cannot imagine colors that we never saw, words that we don't know. We have to use the past in order to picture our future, create our future. And all our future is based on past memories with modifications, Prabhuji tells us. We are playing with our past and imagining some future because of the past, based on the past, related to the past. Who wants this future is the self-image that lives in the past. But the point that we are making here is that finally also future is past. Okay? So the self-image is past, we can say. This is the conclusion of this paragraph. And what Prabhuji tells us, the image, because it is in fact created, we said, in order to protect us. We spoke about it previously, and also here Prabhuji repeats this point. The creation of the self-image is in order to protect us from danger. Right? We said the self-image wants to keep us away from danger, and lead us toward happiness, release, which is also escape from danger. What is happiness? We want to be no suffering. For the self-image. The self-image doesn't know bliss. It doesn't aspire for bliss. It aspires from getting as far as possible from suffering, from pain. Okay, this is the creation of the self-image. How it was created, we learn from Prabhuji, based on different experiences. So, based on specific experiences, we create some instructions for ourselves about what to do and what not to do in order to avoid this pain. These instructions are in the self-image. And like this, we accumulated more and more situations in life. Because of pain, we modified the self-image, made it more and more sophisticated in order to avoid this pain. And we are continuing to have painful situations in our lives. We said mostly it was created in the childhood, but we are continuing to have painful situations in our life and continue to modify the self-image in order to be protected. So let's take a very simple example to relate to this principle. Let's say we walk on the right side of the street and a tree falls on our head. Let's say this is the painful experience. So we say, okay, we will never walk on this side of the street. Because we have some impression, some memory, some rejection from this experience. The instruction is not necessarily logical. It might help us in some cases. The information sometimes can be useful. Maybe there are more trees on this side. But we might lose half of our options in life if we are sticking to this mechanism. And we gave just a very simple example, but like this we have created a lot of sophisticated mechanisms to protect ourselves. The result, Prabhuji tells us, is we are so protected that we don't live. We only live based on these instructions on how to act, where to walk, what to do, what to say, what not to say, how to look, how not to look, and many, 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 many more things. This is in order to protect ourselves. So now we can have instruction to be famous, to be successful, to have money, to be alone, to be in family, whatever. We are creating aspirations, mechanisms, and following with actions that we think are going to keep us happy, which means away from suffering. And Prabhuji tells us this mechanism, that we said it's such a strong mechanism, does not want us to meet reality. It does not want us to walk on the street and realize that nothing happens on the right side of the street because this was just a one-time event, but we don't need to prevent ourselves from walking on this side. It doesn't want us. It wants us to remember this experience and to protect ourselves from this experience. And so the self-image, its agenda, we can say, to keep us trapped, not to let us meet life, not to let us discover the chains that we are situated in. It wants to keep us in the chains because it thinks that these chains protect us. In some cases, again, yes, the image does protect us, and it's good that we have certain instructions. For example, we don't want to run into the road without looking on the sides because we can get hit by the car. This is true. It's good to protect ourselves. And like this, maybe even to some extent, some psychological mechanisms can help us cope better with life. The problem is that all our life are based on these protection mechanisms. And we don't live at all. And what Prabhuji tells us in this paragraph, we don't want to live as self-images. Because every touch with life threatens these instructions, this mechanism that we created and we want to hold on to. Life can tell us that it is too extreme. Life can tell us that it's not necessary anymore. It's not relevant to the situation. It was relevant when we were children, not anymore. We don't want to hear it. We are afraid, so afraid of experiencing this uncomfortable situation that we prefer to keep the program and not come in touch with life. We can take another example that we are going to a trip and we are preparing very, very well. So we have lists of where to go, what places are recommended, and we have what clothes to wear, and we have an umbrella, and we have water with us, and the protection from the sun, and etc., etc., etc. We're preparing so well, but we don't enjoy the trip. So what I think Prabhuji talks to us about here is this balance and the importance of not forgetting that life is the purpose, ultimately. Not to be protected from painful situations, but to live life. The trip is the goal. Not to be prepared for the trip, but to enjoy the trip. The sun, the wind, right? The water. You want to come in touch with the trip. This is the reason we prepare for it. So, in a sense, the same thing happens to us with the self-image. It holds us trapped in the past, and then we don't live. We are ultimately not really protected from suffering, from pain. And this is why it is recommended for us to bring more awareness, bring more consciousness to the self-image, and evaluate this program. Bound by the image, we react according to behavioral patterns. In certain situations, we become irritated or offended. However, it is not us who react. These expressions arise from our memory. We believe we are the origin of our actions, so we try to rationalize them. In these attempts, we blame others for our anger, tension, and sadness. In fact, we do not react because of anybody else. Rather, it is only an excuse to rationalize our behavior. What Prabhuji tells us here, and this is very relevant to our relationships, that we have specific patterns as individuals. Each and every one of us is familiar with his own patterns and his own difficulties. What are the problems, we can say, that he will bring into the relationships, or where he will feel difficulty in this relationship, which is another reaction. These reactions, Prabhuji tells us, are unrelated to our relationships, are unrelated to our situation at the moment. We do rationalize them. We explain them. Of course, it's because this person irritated me, and we have a list of reasons why it was so irritating. Of course. But in a deeper sense, Prabhuji tells us the origin of our mechanism that makes us irritated and upset with others is back in our past, in our childhood. We don't even know why and how it was created. But something or various events in our past molded us in a specific way, molded our self-image in a specific way, and made our reactions to be exactly what they are today. We can easily conclude, if we are more in distance and in thinking, that we have patterns that repeat themselves and repeat themselves and repeat themselves with every relationship we are at, with the banker, with the gardener, with the teacher, with the student, etc. It's us. It's not anyone else. Currently, if we are in a conflict, we are convinced that it's the other person's fault. But if we are more at distance, observing when we go to sleep at night, we know it is really us. We are like this in a certain way, and we fall again and again in the same pattern that we might not like when we are more contemplative. But the source of it, Prabhuji tells us, is not in the relationship. The solution is not in the others. It is not our son or mother or father or husband or wife. It is our past. So here Prabhuji starts to bring us into the observation into the past, into the examination into the past. But how do we go into this past? We heard about this past in the retroprogressive yoga, right? There is the importance of going backward. We need to go backward because we don't know how we arrived to this situation. And we need to check not in the action that we are doing, but within ourselves. But how do we go backward? How do we go into the past? So Let's continue with Prabhuji, and he is going to lead us into this observation, into the past. In spiritual maturity, we no longer blame others for our emotions and behavior. Searching for excuses is the wrong direction and will keep us on the surface. If we looked inward instead of running after those we think are guilty of our misery, rage, bitterness, or anger, we will be able to find the origin of our pain. So first, Prabhuji tells us, before we look into the past, before we check what is the problem, the spiritual process starts. Prabhuji called it here spiritual maturity. I think that we can say that the beginning of the process is in this spiritual maturity. When we understand what we said previously, that it is not the others, but the problem is ours, that we are the problem in our life. As long as we think that there are objective problems, we will be entangled in the objective world and continue to make an effort to fix the objective world unsuccessfully because the problems are not in the objective world. Our problem in life is one, and it's us. Our particular mechanism, our particular patterns, our particular past, and our particular reactions. This is what causes us to be in lack of peace, in lack of happiness, and in no one else. All the world can change and we will remain trapped in the same misery that we are currently trapped in. Prabhuji tells us oftentimes, what will happen if one day you wake up and everyone else is enlightened? Everyone else is in observation, with tolerance, with kindness, with compassion, with love. What about you? The problems are not touched, are not changed even a bit if the circumstances change. We remain the same entity with the same difficulty and maybe even the same desire and aspiration to resolve it within ourselves. We cannot be peaceful because of peace of someone else. We must be able to release ourselves from our suffering, in my humble opinion, in order to really experience peace and freedom and satisfaction. And for this, we are going through this retroprogressive process, the process of observation. So here Prabhuji speaks about, again, the first step, and we are going to continue with his words to walk toward meditation. The first step is to understand that the direction is inward. But as long as we are focused outward, one thing we can know, this is not part of the retroprogressive yoga. As long as you're observing others' faults and we become more and more sophisticated in observing others, the more we have more observation, more intelligence, we can be more expert. As long as our focus is on others, we are not in the work that Prabhuji speaks about. Prabhuji speaks about internal work, that only we matter. Only our faults matter and only our bliss matters in a way. An individual path, as we said, as Prabhuji says in his biography, in the introduction to the books, this is an individual journey. It's all about you. Prabhuji says, I only speak about myself. Prabhuji's disciples will only deal with our individual process, and everyone who listens, only you matter. So the way to apply this consciousness that only I matter is that the problems of others are really irrelevant. They are insignificant. When I am busy with my limitation, with my conditioning that make me face again and again the same walls, I am, Prabhuji tells us here, in spiritual maturity. This is a mature person. Now we can start to speak. So from this maturity, we are going to walk with Prabhuji toward the observation. So let's continue. Our reactions stem from the past, from the image we have created. If we focus our attention on the past, we will become aware of the causes of our suffering. These wounds can be healed if we observe them attentively, as they are mere products of unconsciousness, illusions, and dreams. We react from the dark corners of our unconscious. When we observe these corners, awareness acts like a healing power. In fact, the only thing that can liberate us from the past is awareness. Observing our unconsciousness until we liberate ourselves from the captivity of the past. Okay, so Prabhuji leads us into this past, into this retro. But how do we go into this past? Not by going backward in the line of time. Not by analyzing the past and living in the past and dwelling in the past and in what happened to us and how it happened to us. No, Prabhuji tells us this retro happens when we are in the present. When we are now, we can observe the wounds, this unconsciousness that is suffocated underneath our self-image. We don't know unconsciousness, it's unconscious. We don't want to know it. It's too painful, it's too complex, it's too deep, it's too covered. We're building more and more covering, get far and far from further and further from this unconscious. Prabhuji tells us in order to release this unconscious, the only way is observation. And as we know, observation, as Prabhuji tells us, is happening only now. And Prabhuji tells us this observation works like a healing power, like a magic. We don't need to worry too much about how all these processes are going to unfold, what exactly we want to do and how we want to do, and our problems seem to us so complex and so impossible to solve. Prabhuji says observation acts like a healing power. Only pay attention to the wounds, to the painful places. And this retroprogressive process will happen by itself, with this love of observation, with this compassion of the observation. Naturally, this process will happen in an individual way in each and every one of us, particular and individual way. But for sure, Prabhuji tells us, if we bring attention, quiet, meditation into our life, this past is going to gradually be released, be liberated. Let's continue with Prabhuji's guidance into this liberation from the past, to this healing process. Prabhuji continues to guide us. So we heard the first step is to be mature, to look inward. Then Prabhuji tells us, how do we look inward? How do we go into the past? By observation, by paying attention. This is where the past is going to be liberated. So let's continue. Living based on the image we have created means letting the past live instead of us. It means accepting the yoke of the old. Only if we liberate ourselves from the past captivity will we be able to discover the present. Our self-image is only a trunk filled with the past and future, storing what happened before and what hasn't happened yet. As long as we continue to live hidden behind masks, it is impossible to get closer to the present. So here Prabhuji tells us that we cannot go through the transformation that we want as genuine seekers of the transition to being established in the now, in which we heard from Prabhuji, to being in touch with reality that happens at the moment, to living authentic life, if we don't liberate this past. This past lives in us as the self-image and as the unconscious. That is all the painful patterns that, as we said, created this self-image and that we don't know even. They are unconscious. It lives in us. It dictates our actions. It dictates our thoughts. It dictates our choices in life. We cannot do the transformation, aspire for the transformation, if we're not dealing with all this past. Because this past constitutes us. It is who we are. So, in other words, Prabhuji tells us, all the realized being that we speak about, often that Prabhuji mentions in this article, and that we hear indications about these beings in many scriptures and different religions. These beings that were able to transcend the self-image altogether, transform our consciousness, like the Buddha, like Shankaracharya, like a Baal Shem Tov, and so many others, are beings that were able to liberate their past. We cannot just decide intellectually to leave the past behind and now do different actions. This past is us. It needs to be liberated. And this liberation only happens by observing the wounds. And we will continue with Prabhuji's words again to more specific guidance. How do we liberate this past? If we don't want to over-occupy with the past and be busy with complicated psychological analysis of our past, intellectual understanding, or too painful processes of being too connected to our past, to dwell on the past. This is not the direction in my understanding of this path. How do we deal with this past according to Prabhuji? So let's hear what Prabhuji will guide us in the following words. When you experience sorrow, pain, jealousy, violence, or depression, look inward. As you penetrate your image, you go back in time. Do not do anything. Only observe attentively without reacting. If you judge, you will not be able to observe because these feelings run to the unconscious when they are condemned. If your image feels accused, it will hide again. Assume the position of a witness and merely observe compassionately without interfering. Evaporating the image can only happen when we situate ourselves in the present and perceive reality, free from reactions and interpretations. So as we said in the end of this article, long article, we're getting a meditation guidance. And this paragraph that we just read, which is one before the last, is a very practical meditation guidance and answer to the question that we asked. How do we go to the past? How do we treat these painful places? And we said, Prabhuji tells us, don't look for the past in the line of time, in the past on the line of time, but observe the past now, in the present, the past that is materializing in front of your eyes. How this past is materializing? In the pain, in the discomfort, in the dissatisfaction, in the anger, in the tension. This is our past. All our difficult emotions are the past. This moment. And what Prabhuji tells us, observe them. So we can think that meditation is a state that we want to practice when we are peaceful, when we are happy, when we have no problems, no concerns, no difficulty in the relationships. Prabhuji tells us, no, now is the time to meditate. Now we treat this self-image and can walk it through this transformation. When there are problems in life, and we see ourselves, and our pain is expressed, now is the time to meditate, whether with eyes closed or in any way that we find to create the observation, the quiet. And in this quiet, Prabhuji tells us the guidance is not to condemn them, because if we condemn them, we are pushing them back. So the condemnation comes from the self-image. The self-image doesn't like. We're too angry. doesn't fit our self-image. If we give ourselves this message that this is unfavorable reaction, they do not fit us, and push them back into the unconscious, we will not go through this transformation that Prabhuji speaks about. This will not be a meditation and observation. The observation on which Prabhuji speaks about is let them be. Not justify them, not fortify them, not give them legitimation, not condemning them. They are. We didn't choose them. They appear. If they appear, watch them. This is our opportunity to deal with our past. It is us. What we experience, it's us. For whatever reason, for whoever's responsibility, no guilt, we don't speak about guilt, but for whatever reason, this is currently our reality. So we are the only individuals that can actually treat with this difficulty that we have. The only way that we can is by letting them be. Listen to them. Let them come. So in observation, of course, we don't give legitimation. We don't do anything. There is no output. There is no relation to any action that we want to do or that we don't want to do. This is unrelated to observation. In meditation, in observation, which is where Prabhuji guides us, is only to let them, to whatever comes, be. So this is ultimately, we can see the answer that we are getting from Prabhuji to our original question. We ask, how can I improve my relationships with others? We might ask this question out of so many reasons, motives, difficulties, agendas, etc. It affects us in so many levels, our relationships with others. It's a significant part of our life. And the ultimate guidance that we get is observe yourself. Observe your internal words. See your difficulty, not in the others, in yourself. And we will conclude this topic with the last words of this article that, as we said, are the essence of the message of Prabhuji always, which is the meditation and observation. Meditation means watching ourselves in silence. For this, no action is required, since any effort comes from our image of being doers. Situating ourselves in the present moment and watching requires deep internal alchemy. Choosing to observe the world instead of reacting to it is the great change, the transformation from doer to witness. To meditate is to contemplate ourselves without objectivizing ourselves, while experiencing the presence of what we really are, here and now. Jai Prabhuji.